No, it's good to see everybody. And for those of you joining online, we're really glad that you're able to join with us for our Bible study tonight as we continue to look at how we got the Bible. And very specifically, we are looking at the history of the English Bible, the very beginning leading up to what we know as the King James Version, sometimes called the Authorized Version. But before that one came on to the scene, there was a whole lot of stuff that was going on. So that's what we have been in the midst of talking about. So why don't we begin with a prayer together, and then we will jump into our discussion for tonight. Let's all pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the blessings that we have. We thank you for your word and the fact that we have your word in a language that we're able to read and understand and look to it to be our guidance. We thank you for these blessings, and as we study tonight, help us to appreciate everything that went into making your word accessible to us, and appreciate where we are in history so that we have this opportunity to have a relationship with you. We love you. We thank you for that word, and especially for the word, your Son, that this Bible is all about. And it's through Jesus we pray. Amen. All right, well, as I said, we're looking at a history of the English Bible. And I'm going to just kind of blow through some slides here just real quick, just by way of reminder. Remember, after the Renaissance, or at least I guess what led to the Renaissance to some degree, you have the printing press, the fall of Constantinople, this guy named Erasmus. All of this compounded to kind of create the perfect storm and lead things in such a way that the Reformation eventually was going to take place. Remember, Erasmus, he did not translate the Bible into English, but he was one of the forerunners in trying to restore the Greek text of the Bible, and that's going to be really important in a later discussion. And coming from this, we talked about John Wycliffe. And he's one of the earliest ones who tried to or attempted to put the Bible into the English language. He was one who called for reform. He saw some problems. Let's see here. In 1380 is when he began his translation from the Latin. He didn't translate from the Greek and Hebrew, but from the Latin. And you had a few revisions to this. Let's see here. 1381, not because he translated the Bible, but for different views, Wycliffe was declared a heretic. Well, he declared his heretical view of transubstantiation so that after he died in 1834, 1415, he was declared a heretic, and they dug up his bones, burned them, and threw them into a river. But he stands as one of the earliest calls for reform that eventually is going to be what we know of as the Protestant Reformation. Even though it's going to be a couple hundred years before the 95 Theses get nailed, you have a string: Wycliffe, Hus, and others. Yeah, that was a typo. Yep, we covered that one already earlier. And yeah, I'm not editing these slides, obviously. Once we're past it, we're past it. This is all just kind of way of reminder. We began last week talking about this guy, William Tyndale, right? We did talk about Tyndale. Oh, we didn't. Did we only talk about Wycliffe? Oh, in my notes, I thought we'd covered Tyndale too. Okay, so that's as far as we made it. All right. So let's talk about then William Tyndale, who becomes really, as far as the progression of the translation of the Bible into English, he is the next great giant, you could say, in this progression, 1434 to 1536. He lived during a time we're probably more familiar with, during the time of the Protestant Reformation. If you'll notice, again, what year were the 95 Theses nailed on the door? All right, 1517. That's one of the landmark moments in history that'd be good to probably have in your head. 1517 was when Luther nailed the 95 Theses. That's during his lifetime. So we are right in, with William Tyndale, right in the middle of the Protestant Reformation. So he also was a huge proponent that the populace should be able to read the Bible. And he wanted to create a translation of the Bible into English, but the Roman Catholic Church was opposed to him doing this. Also, at this point, Tyndale becomes connected with a guy named Thomas More. Anybody heard of Thomas More before? Thought maybe y'all's hands might come up. Yeah, I asked them because I know that they read Utopia, written by Thomas More. And so this is the same Thomas More who wrote Utopia and was in the midst of all of this. Well, he and Tyndale are going to become kind of rivals with one another. Thomas More is brought in by the church to be the one to oppose Tyndale and talk about, debate with him why it's important to keep it out of the hands of the common day people. And so they just have constant clashes. More represents the ecclesiastical side of things. He wants to honor church tradition above all else, and there's an assumption that Tyndale's trying to do away with this. So More has in his mind, in fact, let me get this quotation correct here. He thought one of the most appalling ideas of the Bible would be available to be disputed by the lowest people in taverns and such. In fact, he says, for every lewd, and lewd meaning ignorant here, every lewd lad to keep a pot parliament upon. I have no idea what a pot parliament is, but this sounded like a pretty good quotation. You get the idea, though, from it that he's concerned that if you start putting the Bible into the hands of little people, the common folk, the people that haven't been properly educated, they're just going to start arguing about this and that and make a mockery of what the educated elite understood about the Bible. Now, what's really interesting about this is that he actually had been at one point an advocate for putting the Bible in the common language of man, except that it was, in his mind, conditional. He said, yeah, maybe put the Bible translated into English and then let the bishops decide who gets what. If somebody shows themselves to be competent enough, maybe let them have most of the New Testament. But if you have a real simpleton, maybe stop at the Gospels and don't let them have, beyond that, because you don't want them to twist it and mess things up. If someone really seems accomplished, maybe even let them have Revelation. That's kind of his thing, that it would be distributed, the bits of it would be distributed by the bishop as he sees fit, is kind of the way that he looked at that. Yeah, Sharon? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Tyndale, yes, wanted to make sure that it went to everyone, even down to the very lowest class of citizen. By the time, though, that Moore gets involved with Tyndale, Moore he's become, or he's basically forced to become, no translation in English by that point in time, because he's on the opposite side of the debate. Tyndale made his desire known to put an English translation together to the king. He was not allowed to do so. In fact, they said that it would be a heretical text if you had a text in the English language. So he left England, and he went to the continental Europe and decided to work on it there instead, because he couldn't do it in England. And so he becomes a man on the run. He printed, I'm probably leaving, let's see, some of this stuff here. Yeah, so he printed a partial edition in 1525. He didn't have everything done at this point, but his first partial edition was done in 1525. But before he was able to complete everything with it, he was found out, and he was forced to flee, and he went to a place called Worms, spelled worms. And does that ring a bell in any other stories that you know from the Reformation? Yeah, Amy, what were you going to say? Yep. The diet of worms. It's easy to remember diet of worms because those are two words that mean something completely different than what we think. Diet meaning kind of like a convocation of sorts, or almost like a trial type of situation. And then Worms or Worms is the city. But yeah, during the time of Luther, he went on trial at the Diet of Worms. And so that plays a huge part, I mean a massive part, in Luther's story. But I can't get devolved into a discussion of the Reformation in general, because that's not what we're talking about. So he goes to Worms and he completes his New Testament in 1526. So 1526 is the first time that you have a Tyndale New Testament. And he lives the life, really, of a hunted man. Everybody was out to get him. The Catholic Church was out to get him in continental Europe. The church in England was out to get him because he was doing this. Everywhere he went, people were trying to find him out. He lived as a poor migrant, impoverished, running from town to town. So as Tyndale was working on completing the Bible, we have a copy of the Tyndale Bible here. Dave Runner provided this picture from where again, Dave, was this? Okay, the British Museum has a copy of this, so I appreciate Dave sending me a couple pictures. Was the last one the Wycliffe, from a page out of the Wycliffe? You saw that it was like turned to Psalms or something like that, is what was there, or at least his translation of Psalms. And this is the Tyndale Bible, which, after its completion and printing, was smuggled in various inventive ways back into England and sent about. That bit of information is going to be important down the road just a little bit. But as he was working and had completed some of the Old Testament books, the Pentateuch, and some others, he was finally apprehended for his heretical views concerning justification by faith. That was the heretical views that he was espousing that brought him at least under trial. Yeah, Becky? I wasn't planning to. Would you enlighten us? Oh, that's interesting. I don't think I'd heard that before. All right, so the patterning on the edges is there to, at least one of the things, other than making it look beautiful, but one of the things is very practically helps you to know if you've skipped a page based on the gilding that's there on the edge. All right, that's very interesting. So he was apprehended. They gave him time. He spent about a year, actually, trying to get him to recant. There was, I think, a priest that was put over trying to make that happen. They actually wrote books to each other back and forth to make this happen. He never did. He was able to get more translation work done during that time, though. But finally, in 1536, Tyndale was removed of his priestly office, and he was handed over to the secular powers for execution. Also, to note, just to throw this out, not very long after this, Thomas More also faced execution when he refused to accept Henry VIII's second wife as legitimate. Remember, he was the one who wanted a divorce and basically broke off from the Roman Catholic Church because he couldn't be awarded a divorce or an annulment, I think is what he was seeking. And so he said, well, we'll just be the Church of England then, and I'll be the head of it. And Thomas More didn't really go along with that. He retired. And when he failed to show up to Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, failed to show up to her coronation, Henry VIII sent people after him to get him and execute him. So More and Tyndale both faced the same type of ending. All right, Tyndale, when it comes to the Tyndale Bible, concerning his translation of the Hebrew, he is credited. Now, remember, he didn't finish all of the Hebrew. He didn't finish the Old Testament. He got up through, I think, Chronicles was about as far as he got before his execution. But his methodology for translating Hebrew is something that still sticks around today in a lot of respects. He made a way to try to follow the word order and such, and there are phrases such as Holy of Holies and Song of Songs that are the result of him following the Hebrew. Because in the Hebrew, when it wants to intensify something, it just repeats the word. And so you'll have in your translation, holy, holy, and you're supposed to understand that that means that this is the holiest of holy things. So some translations today might say the most holy place, but he's just following the Hebrew itself, and he says, well, it's the Holy of Holies, which has a nice ring to it. So he's credited with doing that kind of stuff. He coined in his translation these phrases, words and phrases. Scapegoat was a word that he used. Passover had not been used for that before then. Mercy seat, the Lord's anointed, gate of heaven, man after God's own heart, land flowing with milk and honey, and as the Lord liveth. And there are more of these types of phrases. I just typed in until I felt like I didn't have room to put what I wanted to put next, and so kind of cut it there. But you can find more of these because he's translating from the Hebrew into English really for the first time. And so a lot of these things are coming about. Remember, Wycliffe used the Latin. He's actually using the Hebrew to do this. He is, and I put a question mark here. By the way, let me get a book real quick. Hold on. I meant to introduce this book last week, and I forgot I had it up here. This is a book called Wide as the Waters, and I have no idea why that title. because you're not going to read that title and think, oh, this is probably a really good book on the translation of the Bible into English, except that the subtitle is The Story of the English Bible and the Revolution It Inspired by Benson Bobrick. That is Wide as the Waters. This is a pretty good source for following all of this. I've been leaning very heavily on this, and also Wikipedia, which is also a very, very good source. Don't listen to people who say that it's not legitimate. Wikipedia is one of the most credible and legitimate resources you will find on the internet, by far. Everything it has in it has footnotes, and they go through and they make sure, and it gets a bad rap. I have no idea why it gets the bad rap that it does, because it is 100% legitimate, and it might be the best resource that's on the internet. So Wikipedia is very, very helpful with a lot of this. And then Wide as the Waters, as far as a book, if you wanted to read more about the progression of the Bible in the English language, that is really good as well. All right, so all of that to say, here's something that was suggested, that he coined the term beautiful. I couldn't verify that, though. But if it's true, it's very, very interesting. Some sources, though, that I looked at said that it was already done back in the 1400s, around the 1480s or something like that. But if it is true, that is really interesting. So he's also the first to use the word, the English word, Jehovah. That wasn't in existence until Tyndale put it in his Bible to translate the Tetragrammaton Yahweh. And he's the first to use the word Jehovah for that. Yes? I don't remember the breakdown of the word, but it's the 4 letters, YHWH, or Yod, He, Vav, He, in the Hebrew. And those are the letters for Yahweh. So when I say Yahweh, that's just the way I'm pronouncing what he pronounces as Jehovah, or Yahovah, I guess is what that would be. And so, yeah, that is the Hebrew word for the Lord. That's the name that the Lord gives himself. All right, that's a good question. I just threw that out, and yes, probably should have explained that a little bit more. All right, very good. Anything else that anybody wants to bring out or talk about concerning William Tyndale before we move on to the next guy? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, his mastery of language was incredible. Sharon said up to 8 languages that he was fluent in and a master of, which made him just the right person to undertake this kind of an adventure to create the English Bible for the first time from Greek and Hebrew, and not just simply translating the Latin. All right. Well, let's move on to the next guy in our story. That's a guy named Miles Coverdale. Miles Coverdale, 1488 to 1569. So let's see here. It was right around the time of Tyndale's death, his execution. Remember, he was in continental Europe, and he was executed for other reasons or such, but it was right around the time of his death that Henry VIII actually began to show a little bit of giving in to allowing the Bible to be translated into English. He became more amenable to this idea under certain circumstances for this kinds of translation. I think some of this probably had to do with his request for annulment in order to annul his marriage or get a divorce, and his frustrations with the papacy, because there were passages from the Bible that were given as evidence against the Pope and against the Roman Catholic Church, that if you actually looked at the Bible and used it, then you would see that it boosted the king's authority and it lessened papal authority, the way that the Bible was. And so he was saying, maybe more people should know what the Bible says. And more people should understand that the papal authority is a lot less than what they thought that it was. So around this time, there were already 50,000 copies of the Tyndale Bible in circulation. Remember, we said they were being smuggled in, and then people from there were also making copies. So there are a lot of them. At this point, there's a tide. There's a wave that's already going through England, and they could make a choice: either take a stand against it or ride the wave. And they choose to ride the wave. They say, well, if we're going to be doing an English Bible anyway, if all of these people are starting to read it, they're reading what Tyndale was able to produce, they've got the New Testament, they're able to see this for themselves. If they're doing that anyway, why don't we do it by our standard? And we'll be the ones that present this, authorize it, and control it to some degree. So the push was led by a guy named Thomas Cranmer. Perhaps that's a name that sounds familiar to some of you during this time, the Archbishop of Canterbury. And also the new Vice-Regent Thomas Cromwell, which also might be a name that some of y'all recognize. Even the new Queen, Anne Boleyn, was absolutely behind trying to get the Bible in the English language. So they were allowed access to do this. And Cromwell sought out a guy named Miles Coverdale to head up the project. Now, let's talk about Coverdale. Coverdale has already presented himself as being on the Protestant side of things. In fact, there was a guy, Robert Barnes, who had gone to trial for heresy against the Roman Catholic Church, those in power, and he had stood at his defense. So that was kind of an early thing that made Coverdale known, I guess you could say. He'd already been teaching against such things as a mandated confession. That is, in the Roman Catholic Church, how they have their confessional, and you're supposed to come in and do your confession. That was part of what you do. And you come to the priest, you offer your confession, he absolves you of your sins. And Coverdale is saying that's not in the Bible. He doesn't have the power to do that. That doesn't make any sense. He was against the worship of images, icons, and things such as that, and also transubstantiation. Who have we seen so far that was teaching against transubstantiation? Anybody remember? Yeah, Wycliffe was, right? And his lollards that came after him. So he is in the middle of all of this as well. So even so, because of some of his teachings and the way that things are going, he still has to flee England in 1528. So in 1528, he fled and went to Hamburg, where he met Tyndale. And there, he and Tyndale worked together on the translation of the Pentateuch. That is the Hebrew of the Pentateuch. And so during his exile, Coverdale did a lot of translation and translation compilation. So he's meeting up with Tyndale. While Tyndale's on the run, he's on the run, they meet up together. They are working on translating into the New Testament together. Coverdale's exile lasted about 6 years. He was able to return in 1535 when Henry's mood had changed. And that's when Henry said, Cromwell, make this happen. And so Cromwell went looking for Coverdale. And then in 1535, the Coverdale Bible was produced. Coverdale was much better at Latin than he was any other language. And he fully, completely admits that this is the case. It's not that he couldn't do other stuff, but he was not an expert in these others. And so he worked a lot with the Latin in particular. His Bible was heavily dependent upon other people's translations. It was, first of all, dependent upon Tyndale's translations. He heavily leaned on what Tyndale had done. What Tyndale hadn't done and what needed to be revised, he used the Vulgate and other Latin translations, as well as Luther's German translation. And remember, if you are remembering your Protestant Reformation history, Luther's New Testament came out in 1522, the Old Testament in 1534, and then the Zurich Bible, which was a collaboration between a guy named Ulrich Zwingli and another guy, Leo Juda. And I don't know if I pronounced that one correctly or not, but that's the Zurich Bible. So he has all of these that he's using, different translations, in order to put the Coverdale Bible together. In the prologue, again, he confesses, I'm not a scholar with these translations. He makes it known he's dependent upon Tyndale's Bible. And this one, with his turn of phrase in the English, he is credited with coining such terms or phrases as the pride of life, the boastful pride of life, phrase, the world passeth away, cast me not away from thy presence, take not thy Holy Spirit from me. That's the way that he worded that. Tender mercies, a respecter of persons, the word loving kindness, which is going to be a major translation for the Hebrew chesed. And then, my personal favorite, the valley of the shadow of death. Now I know who to blame for that, because that's just not a good translation at all, because the word valley is not there, the word death is not there, the word shadow, maybe, it's deep darkness or a dark darkness or something like that, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, now I know who to blame for future reference when I say, I don't know why it was translated this, but it was Coverdale. It's his fault. And he put it in there, and nobody ever took it out, and it still remains one of the most iconic phrases from the Bible even today. It was not, though, without head scratchers. In Isaiah 24:9, he put, the beer shall be bitter to them that drink it, which some people thought was interesting. And this one in particular, Psalm 91:5, thou shalt not need to be afraid for any bugs by night. That one tickled the fancy of some people, and the Coverdale Bible actually became known to some people as the Bugs Bible. That's the way that they talked about it. That's the way they mentioned it, because of his translation of Psalm 91, the Bugs Bible. All right, here, let's see. Just making sure I'm not skipping anything. All right, so upon completion, the Coverdale Bible was given over to the king. He handed it to the bishops and said, what do you think? And they basically said, we hate it. And he said, okay, is there anything heretical in it? They said, no, we just don't like the translation. And he said, okay, well, I don't care. As long as there's no heresy or outright, just being wrong, the translation itself was fine. The king pronounced, if there be no heresies, then in God's name let it go abroad among our people. So, for the very first time, you have a Bible that's being publicly distributed by the government in the English language. And they're sending it out. Even the queen kept one open on her desk in the court at all times so that people could use it and peruse it anytime that they would want to, if they wanted to come and look at it. All right. So 1537, a couple revisions were made on it, but this is pretty much the Coverdale Bible. All right. Questions from anybody or further comments on Miles Coverdale and the Coverdale Bible? All right, the next guy we want to talk about is this guy named John Rogers. And if you really know your stuff about the English Bible, then you'll know who this is. If you just kind of vaguely know, you're probably thinking, I don't remember there being a Rogers Bible. And you're right, there is not a Rogers Bible because he went under the pseudonym Thomas Matthew. He did not write under his own name. He used the pseudonym Thomas Matthew, and he is going to create what's known as the Matthew Bible, or the Matthews version. Maybe not the Matthews version, just Matthews version. So the Matthew Bible, this was a project that began because when Tyndale was executed, Tyndale very specifically chose this man out to be the recipient of all of his stuff. All of his translations, notes, everything that he had to go somewhere, and Tyndale made sure that it got into the guy's hands. And so he is the one that received all of Tyndale's translational work. And let me make sure here. Remember, Tyndale had done the New Testament and really had made it through the Chronicles accounts. And so when Rogers is putting this together, for the rest of this, he uses Coverdale's translation. He does some editorial work. He's going to add a whole bunch of things into this, correcting some things he didn't like about the Coverdale Bible, such as the way it numbered the Psalms. I don't know if you've ever noticed that there's a difference in numbering between the Hebrew numbering of the Psalms and what we typically have in the English. He chose to go with the Hebrew numbering of the Psalms. He took over used the concordance explaining Hebrew idioms from a French Bible that had been put out in 1535. He added 200 plus illustrations, including some full-page woodcuts. Provided introductions for the books, chapter summaries, marginal notes, all kinds of work that he did for the Matthew Bible, and he, again, did it with the pseudonym Thomas Matthew. It was printed in 1537. It was presented to the king, and this as well was authorized to be distributed for production as a translation in English to be distributed. Which means, really just, I guess you could say within a year of Tyndale's execution, the translation that he gave, remember, had been denounced. It had been made illegal. It had been publicly burned. And now, within a year of Tyndale's execution, all of his notes, everything else, it has been approved by the king and has been published with a royal license. Can you see how much has changed in such a short amount of time? So, Some of the marginal notes were abrasive. Not everybody was in favor of this particular version. So Cromwell took this and went back to his buddy Coverdale one more time. So we've got two English translations right now. Oh, by the way, one more thing about John Rogers before we move away from this. John Rogers is going to be the very first Protestant who will be executed by Mary the First. We often think of her as Bloody Mary. That's the way the Protestants typically think of her, as she did a lot of executions of Protestants when she took the throne. Cranmer also, remember Thomas Cranmer, we talked about him, executed in 1556. So 1555 is when John Rogers is executed, Cranmer in 1556, two among many that were executed by Mary the First. All right, so Coverdale is asked to do a revision of the Matthew Bible, updating it with the latest information that's out there, and he was sent to Paris in order to print this because the greatest printing venture, the greatest printing company that was out there was in Paris. There was a certain guy, and they went and said, spare no expense, make this the grandest thing that you've seen before. This, by the way, is going to be known as the Great Bible. So as they're printing in France, they do so. They get actually a lot of it kind of done. They got some more work to do when the Roman Catholic Church intervened because, well, they're in France now. And the Inquisition comes and starts demanding to know what they're doing. Remember, they're not on board with the translation in English. They are able to pressure the printing company enough that they stop the presses. They were going to burn everything that had been done, but enough bribes were made that instead they gave the paper, they sold the paper off to a hat making company, for making of the hats, I guess the inside stuff or whatever the case is. And that company sold it back to England. And so they at least were able to keep everything that was done. And then naturally, what's done at this point, Cromwell decides, well, if they won't print it, I'll just buy the printer. And he does. He purchases the printers, the printing presses that were being used on this, and he hires all of the people who were working on it and has everything shipped to England so that they can finish the printing in England. And this becomes a venture of the state itself, and they basically produce the Great Bible in 1539. And this becomes one of the, probably the greatest Bible in the English language leading up to the time of the King James Version, as we'll talk about later. So, under Coverdale's eye, under Cromwell's financing, the Great Bible is produced. It's called that because of its lavish size and adornment. And it went through many revisions, 7 of them even in the first couple years, but the Great Bible from its institution in 1539 will be the official Bible for the English language for some time, even still being used in the prayer book of the Church of England in 1662. Remember, the King James Version came out in 1611, so it even was well past the coming out of the King James Version that it is still, the Great Bible is still the Bible that is being used in England. All right, and then one more to discuss. Is anybody else wanting to talk about the Great Bible or have any questions? I know I'm moving a little bit fast to try to conclude the class. Yes? Tyndale, that was so long ago. What? No. Yeah, go ahead. did he live to be almost?
And they executed him anyway? It just seems...
Yeah, I'd have
weird
to go
be
back and relook at
executing a really
the
old
dates.
man like that. So, and I'm sure they did, but just
Yeah.
seems odd.
Yeah, yeah. If those dates were accurate, then yes. Yeah, it could have been a typo on my part too. It wouldn't be the first time. But let me just look here real quick. From 90, what did I have? What did I have? Yeah, it's 1494. No, he wasn't that old. I was like, I don't remember him being that old. Yeah. Huh? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was like, when you said that, I was like, I don't remember him being that old. I think I would have remembered that. Yeah, 1494 to 1536 is the date on that. All right, so one more translation to talk about. And don't worry, we've got plenty of time to talk about it. In fact, we're probably going to close up early because there is not much at all to talk about. Another revision of the Matthew Bible was done by a man named Richard Taverner. And he put out this translation. The only reason I'm bringing it up is because in the history of the English Bible, this was a translation produced, and that's really all we can say about it. It didn't catch on. There was no following behind it because when he started on it, he was revising it, but he didn't conclude working on it until after the Great Bible was already produced. So when he put this out, it was already eclipsed. Like there was already something better, and there was no need for the Taverner Bible. But we have the Taverner Bible anyway. It's there, but it plays really no real significance in the story of the translation of the English Bible. Questions on the Taverner Bible? I didn't get these dates wrong, did I? No, I think those are right. Okay. All right, questions on anything we talked about? Walk in to ring the bell. Besides 100-year-old men on accident. All right, good class, guys. Thanks a lot. We'll break for just a few moments and reconvene with a song, with a talk and a song in just a few minutes. Thanks, guys.